will join us from the sides and fill in some of those spaces. It's are there board members here? Jonathan is here, and okay, from the high school board, it looks like do you know Jonathan from Kent? Any other high school, Jonathan Moore? Any other board members? I just want to say to you that the high school board is obviously interested in this. And I think we're ready and willing to tackle some of the challenges which are connected to the reform movement. And I am aware from my own reading that a lot of this is still rather fluid. Is that an accurate statement?
It's
Understatement.
Right. It's sort of getting washed up.
These two people really don't need any introduction, but I will attempt just to give a little bit. Roberta from the 64th District has been in office for a long time. I think she's willing to say that. She co-chairs the Higher Education Committee, which already has had some action last year as a result of the Governor Malloy. And she is a graduate of this high school.
No, I didn't.
I'm sorry about that.
I worked
I'm
here.
sorry you did. You worked here.
I worked here, that counts.
I will just read one statement. For the last 18 years, she served on the Regional Advisory Council of the Northwestern Connecticut Community College, the Advisory Board for Sharon House, and a member of the Northwest Connecticut Arts Council. And you have a long list of other things you participated in.
Right, 21st Century Fund for the high school.
And the 21st Century Fund for the high school.
That's
Andy
good.
Roraback from the 30th District, first elected in 2000, and he runs in 2012. And if he's successful, he'll be representing us in Washington, D.C. from the 5th District. So we appreciate your being here. I think that what we need to know as board members, and I assume some other people here also, I am very concerned, obviously, about the impact of all of this. I assume you'll speak about that. Something to do with the timetable, what is anticipated in terms of all this coming to pass. Interested in the difference between what the governor has proposed as part of the reform package and what the Education Committee is now working with. Appreciate something on that. Also like to know something about your role in all of this, both of you, going forward. I hear terms like sweeping reform, meaningful reform, overhaul, pushback, equalization, and watered down. And I think all those things sort of come out in headlines, and I think we need to go a little further beyond some of those headlines. So if you want to go ahead, I'm not sure who's going first.
And Phil, there aren't so many people. I think Roberta and I know most of the individuals that are here, but I don't know all of the individuals that are here. If we could take just a minute, if people don't mind identifying themselves and what their affiliation is.
I'm Priscilla Belcher, and make sure your microphone is turned off when you don't want other people to hear what you're
Well,
saying.
I guess a lesson for all of us.
I'm Beth Folds. I'm a Title I teacher here at Houston Valley Regional. Patricia Chamberlain, Superintendent of Schools. Rachel Masta, Cornwall Board of Ed. Jean Anderson, preschool teacher. Pat Palmer, I'm the computer technology teacher.
I'm Martha Schweikert, I'm the supervisor of special education for Region 1.
Paul Henry, C. Lakeville, parent of 3 children, two graduated from Housatonic and one was a junior now.
Brian Bartram, Chairman, Salisbury Board of Education.
Why don't we go behind you, Brian, and we'll be where we were at.
Susie Nielsen, teacher in Sharon, and Board of Ed member in Kent. Colleen Indoor, Sharon, teacher, grade 3.
Rachel D'Ambrosio, I teach 7th and 8th grade in Kent.
Ray Douglas, resident of North Canaan. Kim Sports Selectman, North Canaan. Charlie Friday, Selectman in North Canaan.
Oh, I'm Josh Gitlin, CATV 6 Local Access.
I'm Barbara Bedigal. I live in Lakeville and I teach 4th grade in another town, but I'm on sabbatical this year, so I'm interested in.
John Prati, member of the Board of Selectmen in Sharon.
Jeffrey's already been introduced.
Jonathan Moore, member of the Region 1 Board of Education from Kent.
Patrick.
Patrick Sullivan, Lakeville General Fly Fisherman. Excellent.
Ruth Epstein, Waterbury, Republic American. Linda Sloan, teacher at Lee Fellow School, first and second grade.
Robin Faust, first and second grade teacher at Lee Kellogg.
Lisa McClay, kindergarten teacher at Salisbury Central.
Carolyn Trishik, Salisbury. Eliza Keller, Sharon.
Marty Backroft, Board of Finance, Sharon.
Cheryl Paulson, fourth grade teacher at Sharon.
Michelle Pastor, Board of Ed Sharon.
Joseph Marco, science and math teacher at English Grammar School.
Dominic Coyote, Board of Ed, Fallsbridge.
Mark Burdick, I'm an ag education instructor here at the high school.
Bonnie Moody, teacher at the high school, mathematics.
Bill Willis, Chairman, Salisbury Board of Finance.
Claude Rello, Board of Ed, Salisbury.
Scott Fellows, chair of math department at the high school.
Nora Ohio, chair of the science department at the high school.
Enough?
Sure.
Hi, I'm going to stand up because I'm used to standing in this room, so I feel more comfortable doing so. I think it's easier for me to project standing up. I think I want to say right off, coming out of the gate, that I did not and did not support the governor's proposal on educational reform, and for many reasons. It was actually yesterday, well, actually Monday, where a critical step has been taken in this process, and that's the Education Committee voted out on Monday a new bill. So many of the issues that certainly people that I heard from in this room is no longer an issue, but it will continue to be something we need to, I shouldn't say it's not an issue anymore, it is an issue, because this is where the next step is going to take place, and that's the negotiations that will take place between the legislature and the governor. But I can say that I think that the support is clearly not there for most of the agenda that the governor was putting forward. It made significant changes on Monday to the governor's bill. The governor's bill had a lot of really admirable goals. It aims to close Connecticut's educational achievement gap, which is the widest in the country. And secondly, the governor was coming from the perspective of economic revival. And what has been critically important is Connecticut's ability to produce a skilled and educated workforce. And we have, in the past, we have led the nation. We no longer do anymore. 60% of the jobs in Connecticut today require some sort of post-secondary education beyond high school. But only 40% of our students graduating today go on. In 10 years, over 70% of the jobs in Connecticut are going to require post-secondary education. That doesn't mean necessarily college, but some sort of education or training beyond high school. Unfortunately, too many of our students are graduating. They're not college ready, and they're not employment ready. That's the challenge before the governor and the legislature. We have a responsibility to provide every child an opportunity to have access to quality education. And one of the key components of the governor's proposal was really looking at our lowest performing schools. In fact, many of the reforms contained in the bill really were specific to our low performing or priority school districts. One of the key components of the bill, which will continue to be a part of it, is early education, early childhood education. And the governor put in 500 new positions statewide for early childhood education programs. Clearly that's not enough. We needed to do more. The Education Committee moved that up to 1,000. In this area, that'll mean that there will be more availability for North Canaan, for instance, which is a competitive school district, to be able to get those early childhood slots. The funding piece is good. The state funding will stay level. So our educational cost sharing grants for those who are on the Board of Ed or the Selectmen, that Board of Finance, that'll all remain the same. We're still working on the ag science programs, and hopefully in the appropriations bill that comes out, we'll do something to increase the funding for vocational agriculture. The governor's bill, which I disagreed with, only put extra money into ag programs that serve priority school districts. So if you could attract someone from a priority school district to come to your towns or your school ag science program, you would benefit from that. That doesn't help the northwest corner, the towns that I represent, which are served by Housatonic, Wamogo, and Region 7, all have ag science programs, and they would have not benefited from this program. So the other one was the small district issue that was certainly critical as far as I was concerned. For me, it was a non-starter in terms of being able to support the governor's bill. That has been removed from the legislation. It's no longer there, only calls for a study moving forward. Tenure. This is the one that generated obviously the most attention. And I think that the focus on tenure was extremely unfortunate, because what it did was it took the conversation that this state was having on educational reform and shifted it in the wrong direction. Because changing the tenure system is not going to close the achievement gap. It may be something we need to deal with, but the reality is that's not how we're going to get there. Changing the teacher evaluation system was obviously a major part of this reform package as well. And while I agree there needs to be fair and very accountable standards, I was concerned that the way the proposal was on teacher evaluation would drive a lot of teachers away and send some of our best teachers elsewhere. Test scores being used to judge teacher performance was not workable. For one reason, not every teacher teaches. 70% of the teachers do not teach a course or teach in a program that would have a CMT or a CAP test or some way that you could evaluate teacher performance. So that wasn't something that I felt could work. The other part of it is teacher and student, student performance is and teacher input is cumulative. It's not like one teacher, one snapshot in one grade is going to make a difference for students. Teacher dismissal. We need to lengthen the time, and we need to limit arbitration, the number of arbitrators down to one. I agree with that. I think that our districts are wasting, not just for this area, but statewide, way too much money in the arbitration process. And that part clearly needs to be something that I think the teachers agree with and the administrators and would agree with as well. There's many factors that influence student performance, and I don't want to go on too much, but certainly parent involvement is a key component, as far as I'm concerned, to student performance and how well we succeed. And while that is mentioned in the governor's bill, I felt it was lacking. I felt that more needs to be said on that and more could be done. I think I'll end there, and just to say that I think we all can agree that we can do better for our students, and we should work together as a community, as parents, as educators, as administrators, to ensure that our students are provided the best possible education we can provide.
Will you take some questions now?
Well, I'll let it.
Or would you want to
why
let
don't you wait, 'cause
Andy,
I
you want to
think-
go ahead and do it and take them all?
Yeah.
If I may, sure. Here, my name is Andrew Roraback. I'm a state senator representing 15 communities in Northwest Connecticut, and I'm in my 18th year of service. And I feel like I've come to the wrong place, quite frankly, because I know firsthand the quality of education that's offered to young people in Region 1. And this bill is not directed, nor should it be directed, at systems which are succeeding. It is directed and ought to be directed at systems which are failing. And the truth is that in the state of Connecticut, there are too many systems which are failing, and they're failing because the students who are there are achieving at levels which should be unacceptable to all of us. The reasons for their poor achievement are many and complicated, but I think everyone recognizes that there is an imperative to do better by those kids for whom the system is not working. We were invited here, that's why we're here. The other point that I would make is I think style matters. And I credit the governor for his work ethic, but I don't always give him high style points. I think the tenor of this debate has been made more adversarial than it ever needed to be. If we began from a set of common facts and worked towards a common goal of system improvement, I think the discussion we would be having would be a much healthier discussion. Instead, the dynamic which has been created is pitting the governor against the legislature, hardworking teachers against elected officials. It's not a healthy climate for a productive conversation. At the risk of getting myself in trouble, I will raise one of the issues that we are discussing as a state and which the nation is discussing as a nation. And that is the question. I would welcome your input because I've had last year long conversations about what the right answer is to this question. And the question is, in the face of declining enrollments and or budget restrictions, which compel a reduction in the professional workforce in a school system, what criteria, if any, should the Board of Education or others be asked to use in making the very difficult decision about how to come up with a smaller workforce? Should seniority alone be the sole determining factor in making those hard decisions? Now, I, for one, am very fearful of a system which invites reductions in staff to take on a political component, that if someone has crossed administration or members of the Board of Ed, that they might be fearful that their job would be on the line for reasons wholly unrelated to their performance. That's not a world I want to live in, and I don't believe it's a world anyone here would wish to live in. But now that Connecticut has adopted a unique student identifier which travels with every student from kindergarten through graduation in high school, we have ways of honing in on objective, measurable criteria for how individual students are performing. It's not fair to expect that a teacher who is teaching a class filled with underperforming students, that teacher shouldn't be punished because of the hand that they're dealt in terms of who's sitting in their classroom. What we should expect, though, is that every teacher will do the best they can with whatever hand has been dealt them. And when we can track the performance of individual students through the system, we begin to have the makings of criteria by which objective decisions might be made if it came time where there needed to be a reduction in force. But what I'd like to do this evening is to find out from you, maybe it's the case that the best system is the system that we have now, that we should only, if we have to reduce force, we do it purely on the grounds of seniority. The other thing people say is, well, they would the boards of ed or the administrators would want to terminate the jobs of the most experienced instructors because they're the ones that are making the most money. And if they wanted to save money, they would target good senior teachers in order to save money and keep the lower paid, more junior members of the faculty. It's a difficult conversation, but I don't think we can not have the conversation because the conversation is being had in a lot of different places. And I think that there are few people who are looking at our system who come to this process with bad intentions. I think everyone who comes to this process, and the fact that you're here tonight is evidence to me that you are here for good intentions. But people of good intentions can sometimes disagree about what the right answer might be, and that's where this kind of dialogue helps us put a sharper point on the hard questions that we face. So I'd like, the way Roberta and I best do our jobs is not by talking at you, but listening to you. So thank you very much. I have to leave around 6:30, unfortunately, but between then and now, I'd like to hear as much as I can from all of you.
You can leave the tough questions.
Exactly. Save the hard ones for Roberta.
So, we'll take questions at this time.
Well,
okay, right there. Please, go ahead.
Do I state my name and all that?
No.
Sure.
Don
Sure.
Coyote, Board of Ed, Falls Village. I want to go back to the small district part of it because I want to kind of get the idea of what was behind it. I'm trying to figure out, was it to save money? Was it to encourage a regionalization of the schools? Because to me, they're two very different conversations. And as a Board of Ed member, I kind of want to know what the thinking is in the state because, again, we have to guide our small community by that.
I think as I understand the proposal and my discussions with the governor's office, because as you can imagine, he's not too happy when this proposal came forward, since I represent a lot of small towns, as well as Andrew does. In my discussions, it was a question of really saving monies on education for the towns. It was geared for towns with under 1,000 students and above the average cost, thank you, per student in Connecticut. And all of our towns fit those two criteria. So it was definitely seen as a cost-saving measure. When I met with the governor's office, they said, no, it wouldn't apply to your towns. It would only, what they were looking at was school districts that had less than 1,000, but a principal and a superintendent, which we don't have. We have one superintendent for 7 towns, and we have individual principals, but we don't have superintendent for each of the 6 towns and schools. That being said, legislation didn't say that. So that was my concern moving forward. But obviously, enough people spoke up, including the president of the Senate, who happened to have a wife who was the principal of a school in one of those towns that was on the list. So it obviously was something that was then removed from the bill that came out of the Education Committee. So that was the genesis of it.
Okay. I think it was kind of a half-baked idea, quite frankly. I don't think much thought went into this provision in terms of how it would apply to districts that were already regionalized. I mean, I represent Region 6, Warren, Morrison, Goshen, Region 1, these 6 communities, and then Region 12, Roxbury, Bridgewater, and Washington. All of them would have suffered by this bill when all of them have done the right thing years ago. I mean, Region 1 led the country in doing the right thing. So for us to say in 2012, now we're going to impose a penalty is counterintuitive.
Another question?
That was the same question, and they answered it to my satisfaction.
Surely, more questions. John?
I was a little unclear with both of you. Andrew, I don't know if you feel seniority doesn't work for teachers, but if you don't want to get the politics involved, I mean, how do we do an evaluation process that works? Or do you believe seniority is the way to go?
I don't know. What I want to find out is what people on the front lines think. The individuals that are here tonight all work in schoolhouses. They know better than me what criteria would best advance the interests of students. And ultimately, I think that that's what all of us are focused on, is what would be best for promoting the achievement of the students in our schools. So I'm fearful of people being terminated for political reasons is something that I find totally unacceptable. So then that begs the question, are there methods by which instructors could be evaluated which would form the foundation for a reasonable conclusion as to whether they are performing at the optimal level?
Does the agreement that was reached through the, I only know the acronym, PAEC, the evaluation, doesn't that address?
Well, I think that that's what I want to find out from all of you. I mean, the leadership of both the Connecticut Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers have invested a lot of themselves in coming up with this new evaluation system. And because I'm not going to be the subject of that, all of you are going to be measured by those criteria. To the extent that you have opinions, now would be a great time for us to benefit from them.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is something, I mean, you don't have to think about it today. You may want to email us some of your thoughts, but I do think that that is an issue in this legislation that is going to keep moving forward because in many respects, the goals are the same for the stated goals, anyway, of the governors and what the teachers' unions have put out. So I do think that it will be an important discussion as we go forward. One of the things that I have felt strongly about is the lack of ongoing support for teachers once they get into a classroom. And we used to do more of that, I think, in the past than we do now for a lot of reasons. But I think that is so important. It's particularly important when you look at our new teachers who we're not retaining. Someone said to me, went to speak somewhere about, what are you going to do about tenure? Get all wound up about tenure. Incompetent teachers that you can't get rid of. I said, right now in Connecticut, actually our problem is retention, is teachers who are under 5 years staying in the profession because it is a challenge and they don't get the support in the classroom they need. I do think an important part of this bill is going to be the emphasis on professional development. The good news is the bill that came out of committee removed the 90 CEU credits. So that's something that is going to be, certainly a part of this. So you had to do the 90 credits every 5 years. That was removed. So the bill only says it requires you participate in professional development. The governor had said in his speech early on that he heard from too many teachers who felt as though they had wasted too much time taking CEU credits that weren't in their field. So that's what's there now. It sounds like that's very much a skeleton, and there needs to be some more meat put on it, but that may be something that you might be interested in putting some input in.
I think sometimes people think evaluation makes a better teacher. Evaluation is just a judgment of an administrator regarding a teacher's practice and performance. So I think you're right. It's not the evaluation that's going to make a better teacher. it's going to be the support and the teacher development that is going to make a better teacher.
Absolutely.
No, in terms of the process, you now have a bill which has come out of the committee. How fluid is that bill, and what are the pressures on it?
Well, what's fluid is that it now becomes a document that will be worked on going forward between now and the first week of May. And that's why I said there are some areas in the bill that I don't feel are totally fleshed out. And I think that's where the input of teachers, administrators, certain parents will be very helpful to this. One of the things I just want to comment on, I've done a couple of these. I actually went to the ones with the governor. Not pretty. Not a pretty sight. But one of the things that's so unfortunate, I felt, was as I looked around the room, and there was like 400 people in Torrington, there weren't many parents. There just weren't many parents. And here you're talking about education reform that affects our children and their children. And there weren't that many. And the governor asked, was a raise of hand, who were the parents? And, it was mostly teachers who were upset about, the changes. So that doesn't, I think for us to make really incredible changes in the system is going to take more parents and families having ownership of their child's education. I can't emphasize that enough. I think that's such an important element of student success.
And what is driving much of this debate is the dissatisfaction of parents in urban school districts. How many parents are here tonight? I mean, as strictly as parents. Well, kind of, but you're also here as a Board of Ed member.
Yeah. I have a child in this.
I understand that doesn't, but in Hartford, many of the forces behind this bill are parents who believe the system is failing their kids. And they see that, and they're frustrated by it, and they want to do something about it. So that's why the Vice Chairman of the Education Committee, Doug McCrory, who works for CREC, I think, right? Works for the Capital Region Education.
He was assistant principal.
Anyways, they're, as I said, we're in the wrong place tonight because people in Region 1 value the education their kids receive, appreciate it, and place rightfully a high value on the work that you do because you get good results for your students. In urban school districts where results are not good, parents are angry. And that anger manifests itself in action. And the action that they're taking is they're hightailing it to the legislature saying, do something to change the system that's failing my kid. And that is driving a lot of the debate. If this meeting were being held in Hartford, New Haven, or Bridgeport, the tenor of the conversation would be a little bit different.
The conversation, though, as it goes forward, is likely to end up taking resources, or not giving resources to communities like ours and using them elsewhere, because obviously you can't just keep cutting staff and faculty. You have to put resources in to better our school system. And your earlier question to me is sort of troubles me because if you keep looking to reduce your staffing, your professional development, all these things, how are you going to improve education? And we are so far from being competitive, it's a joke. Even in a great school district like ours, we could do more if we wanted to. Not so much in our district, but if there was a different type of commitment, whether it's teacher development, we put a lot into that. The whole discussion about teacher evaluation might be a very different discussion. And I think when you look at these other districts, they've got real problems, and there's going to be this constant pull from districts like ours not to give us money, to go elsewhere, and then we're going to be faced with the exact same problem. How do we keep the resources we have and not cut them? And we shouldn't be cutting. I mean, I've had this discussion for several years now when we did try to cut things, and it seemed wrong. It seemed like the wrong conversation, because it's how you choose to do your funding for that piece of the pie. Education's got this piece of the state pie, and as long as you keep chopping away at it, it's not going to get better. Or even if you maintain it as it grows, you're not going to maintain it. So I just think it's a false conversation. I've seen it for higher education in another state I worked in, and I see it. It's a constant thing, and it's coming back to haunt us because of our world competitiveness and our ability to produce students that are capable, even in Connecticut. So,
and I wouldn't want to be misunderstood to be advocating any kind of reductions in support.
No, I don't think you are. I'm just saying it's an answer to that. I think the question
But I think
is false.
when you look, you could ask Patricia, when you look at your enrollment projections in Region 1 over the next 20 years, my guess is this school will be serving fewer students in 20 years than it is today, absent a change in the profile of the population in this corner of Connecticut. So we have to manage declining enrollments. We have to manage rising costs in everything, in fuel and electricity.
I just think that you're going to have such a push from these other communities to get the money that's coming to us currently.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess if there's any silver lining to the fact that we get shortchanged by the state of Connecticut, it's that we don't rely to a large degree on state funding. I wish we did, but to the extent that we get so little from the state, our exposure is at least limited to that.
And it also has to do with not being a priority school district, or the districts or competitive school district where more money is. I mean, there's always tremendous push to move more funding to those. And it is to our credit. The good news is it means that we're doing well in terms of our performance in our schools. The downside is that the schools that are struggling, the systems that are struggling, do not have the tax base we have here. It's just, it's horrible. Hartford just does Bridgeport. They just don't have the tax base that per capita that we have here. There's not much to tax, and consequently, it is a struggle. In our towns, I mean, the range in mill rates is around, I don't know, 11 to 20 something in Falls Village. Is that correct? Well, Waterbury is probably 75. Torrington. So that is the challenge for those communities who are struggling to pay for education. And they have the problem, the social challenges. Poverty is we haven't talked about it, but poverty is a huge part of this equation. Students in Hartford, the class that starts the year is 50% different than the class that teacher has at the end of the year. Talk about evaluating student performance based on by the way, on the unique identifier thing, that goes through college now. So it's that follows you through college, the identifier. So we'll know going forward in the future how that individual student is progressing.
The prime mover for the governor with his program was the gap. I'm not sure how they come up with the so-called education gap. I keep hearing this figure bandied around that we have the worst gap in the country, so I don't know about that. But in what way does the committee bill address the gap? What is in that came out of committee which would actually deal with that? Or are we just sort of giving up on the gap?
No, I don't think any of us are giving up on the gap. I think that is an incredible challenge for this state, because it's not just an income gap, it's an economic gap. We have the largest economic gap in the country. You have a Greenwich and a Stamford next to a Bridgeport, which is one of the poorest cities in the United States. I mean, the depth of the problem of poverty here in Connecticut is incredible. When I served years ago on the Education Committee, they used to put up on the screen a bar graph of different indicators. They couldn't put Bridgeport on the screen because it was just so different from the rest of our towns and cities and states. So, you know, it is a challenge. I mean, it's two-pronged. How do you address poverty, and how do you address poverty? That's the governor's argument. He's saying we can't wait till we address poverty because we've got to start now because the problem is so large. But clearly, this is an important aspect of it. And do I think some of it that's coming out of there could help close the achievement gap? Maybe. Hopefully make a dent in it.
I think we have to step back and recognize that President Obama has made the improvement of education one of his top priorities, and rightfully so. And quite frankly, I think his choice of Arne Duncan to be our nation's education secretary is amongst, and I disagree with the president on many things, but I think his selection of Arne Duncan to be our national education secretary was an incredibly enlightened choice. And setting up the Race for the Top program, which made available millions and millions of federal dollars to improve our schools, was good policy. Connecticut has failed on 3 successive occasions to win in the competition for Race to the Top because our reforms have not cut the mustard in the eyes of President Obama and his education department. 2 years ago, when we brought out our education reform bill, the chairman of the Education Committee, then Senator Tom Gaffey, began the debate as follows. He said, "The bill before us is the product of consensus." Well, of course, now we're all high-tech in the Senate. We're on the web. We search Arne Duncan, Race to the Top. What does Arne Duncan say? Any bill which is the product of consensus will fail in the competition for Race to the Top. So we knew from the inception that we weren't taking the kind of steps that the president was hoping we would take to bridge the achievement gap. And so that's what's driving policy in Connecticut and in all 50 states. And the reality is, we do not live in a vacuum. And Connecticut's problems are not unique to Connecticut. There are achievement gaps in other states, and people of goodwill are working their heart out to try to find out how to bridge those achievement gaps. And so when we find recipes that succeed in other states, we are duty-bound, I think, to do our best to replicate those recipes. Now, it takes a long time for us to validate that what's happening is real, but as each year passes, we learn more and more about what the best practices are for reducing the achievement gap and enhancing student achievement. And our country doesn't exist in a vacuum anymore either. The world is flat, and we are called upon to compete with every country in the globe. And so our collective challenge is to make sure that our system of public education is producing youngsters who are well equipped to compete in the world of competition. It's much easier to identify the challenge than it is to divine the solutions.
Yes.
So you asked what happens next. So the next few months, the next 5 weeks, actually, this will continue to be debated and tweaked and fine-tuned. So we have a bill that is well enough crafted and has the support of a majority of legislators to take it to a final vote. If that doesn't happen, then no action will be taken this year. If things break down, there is that potential that there can't be consensus between legislators and the governor. And the legislators were going to be very much listening to our constituents.
Well, it seems like the disagreement is bipartisan, right? Is that true?
Oh, yeah, I would say that,
I
don't
mean,
you?
you've got.
Well, there are areas
Yeah.
of agreement and disagreement. I think everyone thinks that this process ought to have been handled in a much different way. There is a political reality, and it's not best coming from me because I'm kind of involved in the political reality, but I feel like I do you a disservice not to share with you what I perceive to be the political reality. One of the candidates for Congress in the 5th District happens to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives. His name is Chris Donovan, and he's been endorsed already by both the Connecticut Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers. So I think people can, if your bias is that the leadership of the CEA and the AFT are doing what one would wish to see done, I think it's pretty fair to assume that there won't be any legislation that is called in the House of Representatives which doesn't pass muster with the leadership of those two unions. That's just a political reality. If they don't sign off on something, it's not going to happen in this legislative session. That's my prediction, because I don't think the Speaker of the House, when he sought those endorsements and received those endorsements, I think the expectation was that he would be listening very closely to those interests in this legislative session.
Well, he only has one vote.
Well, but his vote is whether or not a bill will be debated or not debated. So that vote is, he only has one vote, but he controls all of the flow of business, and no bills can be discussed or debated unless and until he signs off on them. So he's the first amongst equals, and his power is much greater than anybody else's, except the President of the Senate, who has a similar power in the Senate.
Well, it also can take, as someone who's been involved in the process, a lot of people within his party pushing forward on something. And we do vote in our caucus, and we have on many occasions overturned a decision or a commitment that a speaker has made. So they're not all encompassing, they're not rulers. They have to be respectful of those that elected them as well. So I think there's some responsiveness in the process. A lot of us, the thing that's so interesting about this issue is a lot of us are invested in this because we come from districts, from communities where people we know contact us and talk to them. When I get a letter from Linda Sloan, I really respect what she has to say, and it influences my approach on that bill, because I know she's an incredible educator. She's a consummate educator. And the same thing with Mark. I look around the room, people who have come to me and expressed what they'd like to see in education reform or an education bill, and we're responsive to that. I'm responsive to, as I said, to the small town district. Heard right away from people. I went right to the governor's office and said, this does not fly. Explain to me why this is happening. They respond to that. The majority of the education committee does not come from small town districts. So that wasn't a priority for them. It's a priority for me, though. It's a priority for me. So we can make our voices heard as individuals and affect the process. So it's very important to have this back and forth with our communities to hear what people have to say. Clearly, I think the whole teacher performance, evaluations, is going to be something that is going to be fine-tuned as we move along. One of the things I also just want to say in terms of the American Federation of the Teachers and Connecticut Education Association, I had the opportunity to listen to both heads, Mary Loftus-Levine and Sharon Palmer, speak on NPR about the reform bill. And I heard Governor Malloy speak the day before on the same one. And let me tell you, they weren't talking that differently from each other. And I think that's the important thing to keep in mind here. There isn't a huge divide. And if you look at the governor's package and you look at the pamphlet that the CEA put out, those documents are pretty darn similar in terms of goals. So I think we can make something happen hopefully this year. And I'm hopeful that reasonable minds will come together and we can have a decent product at the end of the day. I'm sorry I went on.
Okay, I have a, go ahead, you first.
Roberta, you mentioned that the parent involvement is a key issue. Is there anything in this bill that encourages that or helps that?
There is a component on parent participation, but as I said, I really didn't feel in the governor's original bill that that it was strong enough and that I would have liked to see more investment there. I'm not sure what the draft is. I didn't look at that section of the bill. It just came out. I only got the copy of it actually today. So I really went through it rather quickly. But I do feel it's very important. You see it here at this school. When you come to a parent, you come to parent meetings, or the ones that are here who come are the parents of the top performing students. Never changes. And that should, tell us something. They send a message that education is important to their child, and that gets conveyed. Education and support. This is your job, and this is what you need to do. And we care as parents about your education.
Was the time of day the reason that the parents, any reason at all why the parents may not have been here? If they couldn't
Well, I think that a lot of the families that are struggling, there's a lot of single parent families. People come home after a day at work. It's really hard to get out to a meeting. You may need a babysitter or somebody to watch the kids to come to a meeting. It is a challenge. I know some of the schools now provide sitters, so when they have a meeting that they can encourage that to happen. But parents and families are struggling. A lot of people are working 2 jobs to make ends meet.
Patricia.
Is there anything happening in special education? I know early in the books there was a burden of proof question raised. Is there anything happening in that regard?
No, I don't. There were some regulations. Connecticut is, I think, unique in the country in placing the burden on the school system to justify that the programming is sufficient to meet the needs of the student in question. And there's a debate around the appropriateness of that system, but I don't think there's any impetus for change at the moment. I think that any impetus for change has been has gone away. I will also say that I've been in the General Assembly for 18 years, and I've had very few life-changing experiences. I've had a lot of great experiences. I've learned a ton. Very few life-changing experiences as a member of the General Assembly. But one of the life-changing experiences which I did have was when I visited the Amistad Academy in New Haven, probably 5 years ago now. And I went to visit a kindergarten class of young, disadvantaged kids from the city of New Haven who were there because they were lucky enough to have their ping pong ball pulled out of the bag, and whose parents begged for the kids to have this opportunity. And I sat in the kindergarten class, and they were holding up flashcards. L, Z, K, M. And then they had a look at the flashcard with 3 dots on it. And this little girl, 5 years old in kindergarten, looked up and said, ellipses. And I said, oh my gosh, ellipses? And disadvantaged kid from a household which is probably in poverty in New Haven, who at the age of 5 is identifying an ellipses. There is hope in this world for those who pose the biggest challenge for our education system. Kids that don't have the benefit of strong families, of stable households. When these children are placed in an environment where they are not given up on, they can succeed. And we can have, we are and should have a long and vigorous debate about the role charter schools should play in our education system. And Sharon Palmer, I was then on the education committee, Sharon Palmer testified before the education committee that year when the academy was trying to add another grade. They were trying to go from 6th grade to 7th grade, and she was opposing that because it was going to drain resources from the mainstream system. And I said to Sharon, have you ever been to the Amistad Academy? And she said, no, I never have. And I said, please go. And God bless her, to her credit, she went. And she saw with her own eyes. And I would encourage all of you, because you are educators yourselves, they are happy to show you around. If you want a life-changing experience, if you want to feel optimism about the future of public education, check out what's being done. And it is so heartening and so confidence building. It's really some great things going on. Yes, you are. The body language says.
You know, outside of education reform and this bill, it sounds like poverty and the migration of families because of poverty is a huge problem educating children. We see it as educators. We know when kids go from Canaan to Sharon to wherever, those are the kids that get lost. They're the same kids who get lost in Bridgeport and Stanford and Hartford and New Haven. So what else besides education reform? What other bills are there out there that are going to help address this, plug this hole, or help us as teachers address these problems with these kids? Because yes, but your lovely academy, I would guess those kids are there for an entire year. I would guess those kids are not migrating from one neighborhood school to another neighborhood school to another town. I would guess that those parents really, really, really wanted those kids there, and so they're making sure that their kids are getting what they need. I'm guessing those parents made sure, or the school's making sure, those kids had breakfast and lunch, and if they're after school, they had a snack as well. I'm guessing that all those things are happening in that academy.
But the point I'm trying to make is the kids that are being served by this academy are kids that are coming from impoverished, challenged homes. And not to say, and Roberta was talking about in Hartford, half of the class in kindergarten being different in June than it is in September. You don't have to go to Hartford. Go to the Forbes School in Torrington and talk to a kindergarten teacher there. If they have 20 kids in their kindergarten class in September, if you go back in May, 10 of those kids will be gone, and there'll be 10 new faces in that class. And no one can dispute the near impossibility of teaching a kid who is transient and going from one classroom to another. That challenge is nearly insurmountable, and the underlying root causes of why that child is transient, many of the cities in Connecticut are educated people, an additional challenge for whom English is not the first language, and people whose parents are not here lawfully. And that introduces a whole nother dimension of challenges that we all have to deal with.
And my point was that I think at that Amistad Academy, those kids are there from September until June.
Sure.
I'm guessing they're not, a long day, and they're not
Yeah.
moving. Whereas we can have disadvantaged kids, we can try hardest, but we're having for 6 weeks, we have them for 3 months, and then they're on to the next community. So, you know, it makes a difference when they stay in one place. Sorry.
I just want to say that I actually think the key to true educational reform is housing, is affordable housing. It's not just even poverty. It's getting people in a stable household that they can afford to stay in. And you know, we're doing that here in the northwest corner, but not as much as we need to. So. I really feel that that's a key element, housing.
Stable families.
Another Mark.
Just a question, I've been thinking about what Andrew was saying before. What kind of history goes into developing this bill? You know, what went into how it came about? Is it mostly legislators coming together saying, this is what we want to do? Is there
We don't come up
it's
with
going to
much of
lead to
anything.
Well, again, I don't give the governor high marks for style points, and this bill, like a number of bills, was largely, this is the governor's bill, I don't think that he elicited or wanted the input of legislators when he put it together. We saw another example of this year with this liquor store bill, where the governor's people cooked up this uprooting of our existing liquor laws without input from anyone, and then just put it on the table and said, this is the way I want for it to be. And again, I think this process didn't need to be this hard, because if opinions had been sought before the bill was launched, I'm confident we could have found common ground. But that wasn't the style that was employed, and that's why there's been so much resistance, because I think people have felt excluded from the process, and no one likes that.
So that leads me to the second part of what I was thinking, is why isn't there some thought to a task force being put together?
Well, when you look at this, the difference between the governor's bill and what the Education Committee came up with, much of what the governor said, let's do it, the Education Committee said, let's study doing it.
Right.
Find out whether it's
So that's kind of happening, and because there are a lot of stakeholders that should have input other than just CBA or AFT. I mean, employers.
And that's CBIA, CAPE,
yeah.
I mean, we all have.
And getting a lot of people together to try to improve education. Now, I mean, there's all levels, you're talking about elementary kids in Bridgeport, that's one area, and then if you're talking high school kids in Bloomfield, that's another, But it seems to me that's the approach when you start to say, well, what do we do?
Well, I think patience is not this governor's middle name, and he decided that he was going to do education reform, and he's doing it. He comes from a city, Stamford, which is next door to Bridgeport, so he's very familiar with the problems faced by low-performing schools, underachieving schools. And at the same time, as you know, the next part of our agenda is creating jobs, building Connecticut's economy up, get us back on economic, stable economic grounds. And he saw education as a way to achieve that. And to his credit, he's the first mayor, first city, Stamford, to do pre-K. So early childhood education has always been, but I think a lot of it had to do too with input from the charter school folks, and Stephen Pryor, who's the Commissioner of Education, really comes from the Magnet Amistad, model, and I think that was very influential in the governor's thinking.
Yes.
In that same tone then, how is he then in the negotiation process between the two?
And I think we'll find out. Today he said that he wouldn't sign the bill that came out of the Education Committee because even the people on the Education Committee said it's not done yet. It's written in pencil. And the governor said, well, I'm not going to sign a bill that's written in pencil. So between now and May 8th, all of us will bear witness to a process which may or may not culminate in a bill. And what's important for Roberta and me is that all of you try to stay on top of this. The fact that you're here is pretty good evidence that you are staying on top of this. But as you read in the paper or see on TV or go on the internet and learn that this bill is developing, let us know whether you think it's moving in a good direction or a bad direction, because we can only represent you, and you're here, so thank you. That's how we can represent you, is by your being here. I have to be rude because I'm due at the Bridgewater Library at 7:30. I want to make sure I give Jeff directions so that he's a stranger at these parts. I don't want him to miss that performance.
Just before you go, can I get you to do one thing?
Sure.
Can you just tell me, as presently formulated in the committee, what is one significant implication for this school? I don't need to put you on the spot, but we're all from right here. What does it mean now for us? Anything?
Well, I mean, I think that what's not in the bill is as important as what is in the bill. Okay. And what's not in the bill is a penalty for being small. And that's what was originally contained in the bill that's been taken out of the bill. I can't see it ever being put back into the bill with Roberta hot on it and me hot on it. But other than that, I think that what's contained in the bill that came out of the Education Committee is not likely to have a discernible immediate impact on what's going on within the walls of this fine institution.
Do you agree with that?
Well, actually, a little bit, because I think the evaluation process, teacher performance evaluations, the mentoring, the support, hopefully, that will be part of the final product is very important. The goals, as I said earlier, between the governor and the teachers, we're not that far apart on those issues. And I think that's critically, if there's anything in here that's worthwhile, it's really working with our teachers, helping them to be better teachers. I think the CEU's coming out send a message that he doesn't feel that's a worthwhile use of teachers' time. I remember years ago when I was on education, the BEST program. I mean, all I got was complaints from teachers about BEST. We did that. So I think we are responsive in that, but I do think that that is the key. Supporting teachers in the classroom is, to me, critically important.
Okay. Do you wish to answer more after Andrew goes?
Sure.
Andrew, I'd like to make a topic before you go. I'd like to leave a little hint for you. Does anyone have any questions for